Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Imp, and today we're going to be taking a look at the new SILENTHEART Oath. This is the build that I've come up with for the Oath. I think it's actually pretty cool. This is a strength million-ton piercer build, where you basically just build a ton of penetration and just totally shred your opponents. This build absolutely melts people in Chime. You're going to see 2 Chime matches that I did. These are the only 2 Chime matches that I've actually done on this character so far, and both of them I just totally shredded the opponent. It wasn't even close. My overall opinion of the Oath in terms of its PvP abilities is about a low A tier. I would say that there's probably a few better PvP builds that you could go for right now, but this is definitely a very strong contender for a good PvP build, depending on how you build it, of course. And then as for its PvE abilities, I would actually put this pretty low, around a D tier, because you don't really have a lot of mobility to get around and fight lots of monsters very quickly, but you do a lot of damage to single target monsters. So in boss fights, for example, this could be a solid option just to do a lot of burst damage. Now before I show you the Chime matches, I want to talk about some pros and cons that I've experienced with the build so far. Beginning with the pros, the first pro is that there's more points for build diversity. This is going to kind of be the same sort of thing with attunementless, where you're not going to be putting points into your attunement, so you can put points elsewhere. This allows you to do a lot of really diverse builds. For example, I have this million-ton piercer version, but there's many other versions you can do with high fortitude brick wall builds and stuff like that, or ATDG if you want to be really basic. There's also more talents you're going to be getting for this build. I think when I went to my talent rerolls, I had 64 talents or something like that, which is quite a bit higher than the normal talents that you're going to have. So yeah, you're going to get a lot of talents with this build. Some of them are not going to be very useful because they're all from roll 2s, but you can always reroll them, of course. Another big pro of this build, one of the biggest pros, is the insane damage output. This Oath just does insane damage at the moment. I think they are probably going to nerf that at some point in the future, just because the burst damage on this is absolutely crazy and totally shreds people. The uppercuts and even the slide attack just do so much damage to the opponent. There's also more flexibility with traits that you can do with this build. For example, you can do some weird stuff with erudition now. I actually had a little bit more flexibility, and I was able to kind of go a little bit lower vitality, just because I was able to shred my opponents so quickly. I didn't really need the vitality. Another really big pro is that this Oath is really good in unbalanced fights. So if you're in 4v1s, 2v1s, etc., you're going to actually have a pretty decent time playing with this build, because you're going to be able to burst down single targets and get what are essentially iframes as well. This is going to be a pretty good thing for doing ganks where you're going to be up against multiple players while you are only one player. Now another big thing this Oath does is it hard counters fists and daggers, which are very meta right now. They're both very annoying normally, and this is a very good Oath for fighting these 2 types of weapons, because they want to get really close to you and you can really punish that. And the final pro I wanted to talk about is just kind of spotlighting the uppercut. The uppercut is just absolutely insane. It does so much damage. It has that insane range teleport on it, and you don't even have to be looking at your opponent to pull off the teleports. As you can see in these 2 clips here where I show off the uppercuts, you don't even have to be looking at the opponent. It's not like Lord Slice, for example. You can just use it and then it will automatically teleport to you to the opponent that you attacked from a pretty long range as well, so it gives you a very good gap closer. One of my initial problems with this build before I was able to test it out was that I thought it didn't have a very good gap closer, but this uppercut is actually a fantastic gap closer. Now moving into the cons though, we are going to start off with one on the same sort of line as the gap closers. We're going to be talking about the neutral. So the neutral game for this build just absolutely sucks. If you're not able to get your dread stacks up right away, not able to pull off some of those uppercuts, you're not going to be able to get close to your opponents, and if they're using for example a gun build, they're going to be absolutely destroying you. So its neutral game just not very good. You have to have some sort of gap closer that isn't just based off of your dread stacks, because you can't use the teleport until you have dread stacks. Another con is that you're not really going to have a lot of options for weapons. I would first of all say that you should not use fists or daggers with this build. Those aren't going to give you the range that you need to fight enemies. I did see one person with a fist SILENTHEART build, and they just kind of ran from me because they're just not going to be able to win the range battle. The weapons that I would recommend is going for a rifle spear. I think rifle spear is probably one of the best weapons that you can choose on this build, because it does give you some ability to fight the neutral game and to also hit your opponent from range. Generally speaking, guns as well also going to be very good. Shattered Katana and Serpent's Edge are also top picks in my opinion, because they have criticals that also just give you gap closers, which is really nice. Plus the dread stacks will go up if you land the critical, and the Serpent's Edge one in particular will actually give you 3 dread stacks, so that's really good as well. I would still prefer the Shattered Katana over it, just because of my build being a penetration build, but I do think either of those weapons are very good. I also think the Petra's Anchor is a fantastic option here, because again, gap closer critical, and just a very good weapon in general. However, again, they are pretty restricted. There's some weapons that are just not viable with this kind of oath. Stormbreaker is an option though if you are running like a dagger or whatever, because Stormbreaker is of course a critical attack and will give you dread stacks, so you will be able to land the uppercut on them afterward as well. So I think Stormbreaker is also a very, very good enchant for this oath. And then finally, the last good enchant for this oath I would probably say is Nemesis. Nemesis just allowing you to get more criticals to land and also giving you a teleport, which is very important. Another con, like I mentioned sort of before, is that it's hard countered by gun builds. Gun builds are very popular right now as well. They're very annoying to fight in general, and they are even harder to fight with this oath, just because gun builds are able to run from you so much and you're not going to be able to get the gap closing that you really need. Trackstar builds in general are also going to be a huge headache, especially if they have like no life king Trackstar builds. They're just going to be able to run away from you and you aren't really going to be able to ever catch up to them. And this kind of brings me to my next point as well, just because the fact that you aren't able to catch up to opponents very well, your bell options are also going to be really tight. I would say the best bell options for a SILENTHEART build would probably be like crazy slots and portals, because those give you a lot of mobility options that you normally wouldn't have. However, because this is going to be definitely more of a PvP-centric oath, I would also, of course, always consider going for Reaper. I think Reaper is going to be pretty solid as well. You do have faster grips on this build, just one of its inherent talents is just giving you faster grips, but you're probably still going to want to go with Reaper just because it's a literal auto grip. And then finally, the last con that I want to talk about is that you're not going to be able to use deep gems or healing in general. This is kind of a really big one because healing is actually kind of important on a lot of builds. Bloodless gems on mantras is something that a lot of people run right now. The only way you're really going to be able to get healing on this build is from vampirism. Pretty much every other healing option in the game, flame wisp, etc., is mantra locked or deep gem locked. So those are the pros and cons of the build. There's obviously going to be more pros and more cons as more techs are figured out and stuff like that, but in general that's what I would say are the current pros and cons of SILENTHEART. And now the final thing I want to talk about is balancing, because I do think this build is a little bit unbalanced in some ways, either not good enough in some areas or too good in some areas. So my big balancing change that I would recommend is that you could consider reducing the damage output of this build in favor of mobility. I do think this build just totally lacks in the mobility department, and anyone who wants to run away from this build is usually going to be able to do it if they don't have their dread stacks up or if they don't have their cooldown done on their teleport. I could definitely use a mobility passive at least, something that even doesn't have to do damage, just something that gives them more mobility and gap closing to actually be able to catch up to runners and stuff like that. And let's be honest, we could easily stand to lose some damage on this oath. It just does so much damage, it has some to spare in favor of mobility. And overall, that's going to be the video, guys. I think SILENTHEART is a very solid oath, and it's definitely something I would recommend trying out and learning some more techs for. I have an absolute blast playing on this build currently. As you can see, I've been using an elastic shattered katana. I have a seared shattered katana, but it's actually a damage starred katana. Obviously penetration stars are going to be a lot better on a 1,000,000-ton piercer build. I'm going to end up going with seer as the final enchant on this build, but for now elastic is also a very, very good option because it's going to pull my opponents closer to me and not let them run as much from me. So anyway, guys, that's going to be the build. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for the best Deepwoken content on YouTube. I will see you all next time. Let me know what you think about SILENTHEART in the comments below. Peace.